The smell of ozone and stale cigarette smoke clung to the air in the precinct office, a familiar, suffocating perfume. Detective Miles Kalin, a man whose weary eyes held more shadows than a blackout street, leaned back in his worn chair. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with the monotonous persistence of a trapped insect. It had been 32 hours since the call came in. Not a homicide, not initially. Just a missing persons report that had quickly curdled into something far worse, far stranger. The victim was Sarah Vance, 26, a promising graduate student. She hadn't shown up for her clinical rotation, and her apartment door was found ajar by her worried roommate. What they found inside was clean, meticulous, and chillingly empty. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Just a single, disturbing anomaly. Miles pushed a manila folder across the desk to his partner, Detective Lena Reyes, a sharp, pragmatic woman who was usually the anchor to his increasingly frayed nerves. Look at the inventory list, Lena. Specifically, the kitchen. Lena, already skimming the attached crime scene photos, paused at a picture of a pristine, stainless steel countertop. Normal. Everything in its place. Fridge is stocked. Dishes are clean. Except, she pointed to the photo of the knife block. It was a standard, wooden block, but 3 slots were conspicuously empty. The paring knife, the bread knife, and the largest butcher knife, gone. 3 knives taken. No other valuables, no laptop, no cash, no jewelry. Just 3 very specific instruments for cutting, Miles murmured, running a hand over his tired face. The roommate says Sarah was terrified of knives. Had a weird phobia about them since she was a kid. Kept the block tucked away in a cabinet. A killer who breaks in, somehow convinces a victim with a knife phobia to leave without a struggle, and only takes 3 knives? It's bizarre, Miles. Doesn't fit any profile. If they wanted to transport her, why the cutlery? Miles shook his head, looking down at the one truly unnerving piece of evidence the CSU had flagged. It wasn't a fingerprint or a blood spatter. It was a photograph taken of the underside of Sarah's kitchen table, a hidden, almost ritualistic carving that wasn't initials. It wasn't a symbol. It was a single word etched deep into the wood with brutal precision. Listen, they left a message, Lena, Miles said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. This isn't about a break-in or a random kidnapping. This is personalized. This is a story they're trying to tell us. Just as Lena was about to respond, the phone on Miles' desk shrieked to life. It was dispatch. Detective Kalin, we have an incident. A patrol car found something about 10 blocks from the Vance apartment, in an alley off of 14th Street. You need to get down there. Now. Miles grabbed his jacket and the folder. As he rushed out, Lena caught up to him, her expression grim. What did they find? Miles didn't slow his stride, his mind already racing, piecing together the impossible logic of a madman. They found the bread knife. He didn't need to explain that the knife wasn't just lying there. The hook, the bait, the first gruesome piece of the puzzle, was waiting for them, lodged deeply into a makeshift doll made of tangled wire and human hair. The alley reeked of stale beer, damp concrete, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that Miles Kalin knew all too well. The flashing blue and red lights of the patrol cars painted the grimy brick walls in a frantic, pulsating rhythm. Officer Miller, a rookie with eyes too wide for the job, met them at the entrance to the alley. His face was pale under the flashing lights. Detective Kalin, Detective Reyes. It's exactly as dispatch said. Miles and Lena pushed past the yellow tape. The alley narrowed, becoming a canyon of forgotten trash and shadows. In the center, under a single, flickering street lamp, was the macabre display that wasn't just a doll. It was an effigy, roughly 2 feet tall, crafted from twisted hangers and lengths of copper wire. It vaguely resembled a human figure. But what made Lena gasp and Miles's stomach clench was the detail. The doll's head was a sphere of tightly wound, dark brown hair, unmistakably human, and the same shade as Sarah Vance's. And then there was the knife. Sarah's bread knife, its serrated edge glinting dully, was plunged into the effigy's chest. A small, carefully folded piece of paper was impaled on the tip of the blade. "His you is on the way," Miller stammered, his gaze fixed on the horrifying tableau. "We haven't touched anything." Miles nodded, his eyes scanning the scene, searching for anything beyond the obvious horror. There was nothing else out of place, no footprints in the accumulated grime, no discarded gloves. The display was too neat, too deliberate. Lena carefully removed the impaled note with gloved hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. She unfolded it, revealing a single, typewritten sentence. "The silence is a lie. The silence is a lie," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "What does that even mean? Is it a confession? A riddle?" Miles knelt, examining the doll more closely, his gaze lingering on the hair. "It's a message, Lena, just like the carving under the table. This isn't random violence. This is communication." He looked up at the surrounding buildings. Dilapidated apartments, their windows dark and vacant, overlooked the alley. Who could have seen this? Who could have placed it here without being noticed? The thought sent a chill down his spine. The precision, the lack of witnesses, it spoke of someone meticulous, someone who operated with unnerving foresight. "Get canvassers out here," Miles ordered Miller. "Every door, every tenant. We need to know if anyone saw anything. Anything at all, even a shadow." As the CSU van pulled up, its lights adding to the chaotic glow, Miles felt a primal dread begin to coil in his gut. This wasn't a typical case of a missing person turning into a homicide. This was an invitation, a perverse game that he knew, with a certainty that made his blood run cold, that the second knife, the paring knife, would be next. And with each reveal, the killer would draw them deeper into a narrative of their own twisted design. This silence might be a lie, but the story they were being forced to listen to was just beginning to unfold its terrifying truth. Miles and Lena spent the next 12 hours locked in the precinct's makeshift war room, plastered with maps of the city, photos of Sarah Vance, and the chilling effigy. They ran background checks on Sarah, her roommate, her professors, her distant family, searching for a connection, a shadow, a grievance that could explain the grotesque theatricality of her disappearance. They found nothing. Sarah Vance was a ghost of a target, quiet, focused, with no enemies and a routine as predictable as sunrise. "It's the ritual, Miles," Lena insisted, stabbing a finger at the map. "The carving, the hair, the typewritten notes. This is a sequence. He's following rules only he understands. And he's enjoying the listening," Miles countered, pointing to the word carved under the table. "He wants us to absorb his performance." But how did he get her out without a struggle? She was terrified of knives. The roommate swears she'd panic if she even saw a movie with graphic cutting. The phone rang, shattering the tense quiet. It was Detective Ruiz, the lead canvasser. "Miles, we got a hit. A woman in the apartment complex across from the alley. Mrs. Chavez said she didn't see anything human drop the doll, but she saw something else about 4 hours before your officers arrived." Miles grabbed the receiver. "What did she see, Ruiz?" "She said she saw a drone. A small, custom-built one. It hovered low over the alley for maybe 5 minutes, then zipped away, fast. She thought it was just kids." A cold, calculated strategy clicked into place for Miles. A drone. No footprints. No witnesses close to the ground. He's not an amateur, Lena. He's staging this remotely. Before they could process the technological twist, the call came in. The second knife that a park ranger had discovered the paring knife at the city's largest public green space, Willow Creek Park, 2 miles from the alley. Miles and Lena drove in silence, the weight of the killer's cold efficiency pressing down on them. The paring knife was not displayed like the bread knife. It was pinned to the base of an ancient oak tree, a tree known locally as the Whispering Tree because of how the wind sighed through its high branches. This time, the blade was not plunged into a doll. It was pinning a small, professionally printed flyer to the bark. The flyer was designed to look like a lost pet notice, complete with a vector image of a generic, friendly-looking dog. Miles pulled on his gloves and carefully peeled the notice away from the tree. The paper was stiff, laminated. The text was simple, mimicking the typical lost pet format. But the contact information was replaced with a new message, typed in an elegant, almost flowery font. Lost, the sense of truth. Last seen, hidden beneath comforting routines. If found, do not call police. Go to the fountain at the park center and count every tile. Reward. Insight. Lena snapped a photo of the message. Every tile? That's hundreds, maybe thousands. It's a waste of time, Miles. He's just trying to run us in circles. Miles looked up at the whispering tree, then back at the simple, terrifying note. He shook his head slowly. No, Lena. This isn't a wild goose chase. The first note told us to listen. The second note is telling us to count. He is establishing the rules of his game. He expects us to follow them. And I think he's left something at that fountain that only someone who listened and counted would find. He looked towards the park's central, ornate fountain, his eyes narrowed, anticipating the killer's next, intricate move. Get CSU here, but we are going to the fountain. I have a feeling the third offering, the butcher knife, is tied to whatever insight he's offering. The central fountain of Willow Creek Park was a sprawling, multi-tiered stone structure dating back to the 1920s. It was currently dry for the winter, making the counting task ironically easier, though no less maddening. Miles and Lena stood beside the massive basin. The rim of the fountain was inlaid with intricate, geometric mosaic tiles, hundreds of them, creating patterns of blue and gold. This is insane, Miles, Lena muttered, frustration evident in her voice. We have a missing victim, a possible ransom situation dressed up as a serial drama, and we're about to count decorative tiles. He told us to count, Miles repeated, pulling out his notebook. He is controlling the pace. We play his game, we get the next clue. We waste time looking for shortcuts, he disappears. Let's start at the northwest quadrant, right here. They began the tedious work. Miles methodically marked off sections in chalk, his mind simultaneously counting and running complex scenarios. He wasn't counting just the tiles. He was counting the cost of this compliance, the effort the killer had expended to enforce this absurdity. After nearly 20 minutes, when they reached a section near the base of the fountain's center column, Miles stopped abruptly. Wait, look at this. He pointed to a small, nearly invisible discrepancy. One of the gold mosaic tiles, no bigger than a thumbnail, was set slightly deeper than the surrounding ones. It wasn't a mistake in the original masonry. It looked like it had been pressed. Lena carefully dug her fingernail around the tile. It popped out with a faint click. The space beneath was hollowed out, lined with a small square of black velvet. Inside was a tiny, rolled-up slip of paper, secured with a thin, brass-colored wire. The same wire used to construct the effigy in the alley that Miles' heart hammered against his ribs. The counting wasn't the point. The counting was the lure. The killer knew the police would scoff at the task, and only the one detective desperate enough to follow the meticulous, ridiculous rules would find the hidden object. Lena gently unrolled the paper. It was another typewritten message, this one shorter, almost poetic. 3 are gone. 1 remains. She is not lost, but waiting. The true path is where the sun never shines, and the water runs backward. Miles stared at the note, his mind churning through the cryptic wording. 3 knives gone. The bread, the paring, and the third, the butcher knife, is the one remaining. He's confirming the butcher knife is the final piece. She is not lost, but waiting. Sarah is alive for now. But where the hell is where the sun never shines and the water runs backward? Lena demanded. Miles slowly scanned the area, his eyes moving from the bright mid-morning sky down to the massive, dry fountain basin. Think, Lena. A place where the sun never hits and the water runs backward. His gaze fell on the fountain's large, concrete drainage access. It was a heavy, bolted cover set into the deepest part of the basin, meant to allow maintenance workers access to the subterranean pump system and pipes. The sewer and storm drain system, Miles breathed out. The pipes are underground, perpetually dark, the sun never shines. And the water flows up through the pumps, not down, to the tanks and back out through the fountain jets. It runs backward. Lena's eyes widened with a mix of horror and sudden understanding. He's directing us into the underground. But what's down there, Miles? The last knife or her? Miles already had his cell phone out, calling for backup and an immediate warrant for underground access. Both, I think, he said, looking at the heavy metal cover. And something else. I think the butcher knife isn't just a clue this time. I think it's a guard. The maintenance crew arrived quickly, their faces grim under the heavy work lights they set up around the fountain. Miles and Lena stood by as the thick, rusted bolts of the drainage access cover were slowly ground free. The moment the heavy steel plate was lifted, a blast of air, damp, cool, and smelling intensely of mildew and stagnant water, rushed out. Below, a dark, vertical steel ladder descended into a concrete cavern. The schematics show this is a pumping station access shaft, Detective, the foreman said, handing Miles a high-powered, rechargeable flashlight. About 30 feet down to the main outflow pipe. It's tight quarters. We're going down, Miles stated, clipping his service weapon to the front of his vest and checking the charge on the flashlight. Lena hesitated only for a moment, her usual pragmatism battling the surge of fear the dark tunnel inspired. I'm right behind you. But Miles, be careful. If he's anticipating us down there, this is his territory. Miles didn't reply, already swinging a leg over the opening. He started his descent, the sound of his boots echoing unervingly in the confined space. The beam of his flashlight cut a stark circle through the absolute blackness below 30 feet, felt like 100. When Miles finally reached the bottom, he found himself in a narrow, rounded concrete tunnel. The air was thick and heavy, and the distant, constant drip of water sounded like a distorted heartbeat. Clear, he called up to Lena. Lena followed. Miles swept his light around the tunnel. It was about 8 feet wide, the floor slightly damp. The pumping machinery was silent, thankfully, but the whole space felt alive with a tense, unnatural stillness. Then he saw it. About 15 feet ahead, the beam of his light caught a shocking splash of color against the drab gray concrete. The butcher knife, the last of the 3 missing blades, was the centerpiece of the third offering. It was wedged, handle first, into a hairline crack in the concrete wall, but this time it was draped on a length of vibrant, crimson ribbon, the kind used for wrapping gifts, was tied meticulously around the handle. The ribbon trailed down the wall, leading Miles's eye to a shallow indentation in the pipe floor. In that indentation, the killer had placed a single object, Sarah Vance's driver's license. It was undamaged, perfectly clean. A picture of her smiling face stared up into the flashlight beam. Pinned to the ribbon, just below the hilt of the knife, was the 4th and final typewritten note. Miles carefully detached the note. His hands were steadier than he expected, focused by adrenaline. The final curtain is not yet drawn. You must know what she hides. Follow the sound of the hummingbird until the water is high. The door to her silence is locked by a name. The hummingbird, Lena whispered, having just reached the bottom and looking over his shoulder. What in God's name is the hummingbird? Miles's flashlight beam shifted from the note to the butcher knife, then to the clean, unnerving picture of Sarah. He looked down the long, curving tunnel of the drainage pipe. He said the butcher knife was the one remaining, Miles said, his voice low and tight. And it's marking the entry. This tunnel is the path. We keep going until we find the sound. And we don't stop until we know what Sarah Vance hides. Miles took a deep breath of the stale, heavy air and started walking into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight bobbing ahead like a desperate, lone star. The game was no longer external. It had moved into the claustrophobic, terrifying depths of the underground. The tunnel stretched before them, a seemingly endless concrete snake winding beneath the foundations of the city. Miles and Lena moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Every sound was magnified. The distant rush of water, the occasional scrape of their gear against the pipe wall, and the heavy rhythm of their own breathing. They had been walking for nearly 20 minutes when Miles stopped, holding a hand up to silence Lena. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Lena strained her ears. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a high-pitched, almost musical noise, incredibly faint, reached them. It was a rapid, rhythmic whirring sound, too mechanical to be a natural animal, too light to be machinery. The hummingbird, Lena breathed, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. It sounds like a small motor, or maybe a hidden speaker. They followed the faint frequency, their pace quickening. The whirring sound grew slightly louder, leading them deeper into a section of the pipe where the walls were stained dark brown and the concrete floor was covered in a slick, algae-like sludge. Finally, the tunnel opened into a large, circular chamber, a subterranean junction point. For massive pipes converged here, and in the center stood a concrete column supporting the ceiling. And there, affixed to the column, was the source of the sound, a tiny, repurposed security camera. It was modified with a small, oscillating motor that caused the camera to vibrate slightly, producing the distinctive, continuous hummingbird whir. The lens was staring directly at the junction point. "He's watching us, Miles," Lena hissed, sweeping her flashlight beam frantically around the chamber. "He's been recording this entire descent." Miles ignored the camera for a moment, his eyes fixed on the base of the central column. The floor here was partially flooded, the water about an inch deep. And resting in the middle of the shallow pool was another object. It was a sturdy, leather-bound book, Sarah Vance's personal diary. Miles waded into the water, knelt, and carefully retrieved the diary. He turned it over. A thick, industrial zip tie secured the book shut, and a cheap, plastic name tag was woven through the zip tie, bearing a single, handwritten name, Nathan. The name that locks the door to her silence. Miles muttered, recognizing the third element from the last note. He turned his attention back to the water level. The note had said, "Follow the sound of the hummingbird until the water is high." "Lena, look at the water level," Miles said, pointing to the water marks on the concrete walls. "It's normally several feet higher down here. The killer must have manually diverted the flow, or waited for a dry period to place the diary, then let the water start rising again." As if on cue, a low, ominous rumble resonated through the pipes. The distant sound of rushing water, previously a quiet whisper, became a forceful roar. Lena's eyes snapped to the pipe entrances. "Miles, the water is coming back," he said, "until the water is high. This chamber is going to flood." The level in the junction point was already beginning to rise rapidly, the shallow pool deepening into a menacing slick. Miles frantically examined the central column and the four converging tunnels. "We need to get out of this chamber now." "But which pipe?" "He knows we have the diary and the name Nathan. He's left the key, the answer, but the flood is the timer." He flipped through the zipped-shut diary, recognizing the urgency. "The final curtain is drawn when the water is high. He wants us to drown with her secret. We need to know what Sarah hid, now." The rumble intensified, transforming into the deafening rush of tons of water surging through the pipe system. The water level in the junction chamber was rising with terrifying speed, already reaching Miles's shins. "We have seconds, Miles," Lena yelled over the roar, pointing to the pipe directly opposite the one they had entered. "That one looks like it leads to a higher access point. It's the steepest incline." Miles didn't argue. He grasped the zip-tied diary and, with a desperate surge of adrenaline, plunged the recovered butcher knife into the heavy-duty plastic tie, slicing it through. As they both waded toward the exit pipe, he tore the book open to the last few pages, ignoring the water splashing up around him. "Find it. Find what she was hiding," he shouted to Lena. The pages were dense with Sarah's elegant handwriting, filled with typical student musings and clinical notes. But the final entry, dated the day before she vanished, was different. It was written in a shaky, panicked scrawl. "I can't believe Nathan has been doing this. I only found the files yesterday, hidden on the old shared server. Not the listener, not a monster, just Nathan. He's been using the hospital records to create fake identities, ghosting people's pasts. It's not just petty theft, it's erasing lives. He knew I saw them. He sent the text. Listen to the silence. Miles scanned the last line, a chill going through him deeper than the cold water. Sarah was not targeted randomly. She had uncovered a secret far more mundane, yet somehow more terrifying, than a serial killer's ritual. It's not a monster, Lena. It's an identity thief. A blackmailer. Nathan used his access to hospital records to ghost people. Sarah found his files. The water level was now past their knees, the current becoming dangerously strong. They were less than 10 feet from the escape pipe entrance. Who is Nathan? Lena asked, straining against the water. Miles quickly flipped back to the first page of the diary. Beneath Sarah's name, written in pencil, was a single, institutional detail. Clinical supervisor, Nathan Silas, MD. Nathan Silas, her supervisor at the hospital. He had the access, the motive to silence her before she exposed him. He's the one we're looking for, Lena. As the main force of the water hit the chamber, it spun them around. Miles lost his footing, his flashlight plunging into the churning brown water. The roar was deafening, visibility zero. Grab the pipe edge. Lena screamed, securing herself against the concrete wall and reaching out a gloved hand. Miles scrambled, his fingers scraping uselessly against the slick, mossy wall. He lunged forward, his free hand connecting with Lena's wrist just as the powerful current slammed his back against the chamber wall. With a unified, agonizing effort, they pulled themselves into the relative safety of the upward-sloping exit pipe, crawling on their hands and knees against the rising tide. Miles dragged himself up a few feet, gasping for air, the sodden diary clutched to his chest. He looked back down at the churning, flooded chamber. The camera, the hummingbird, was now submerged. The killer had successfully wiped the slate clean of all physical evidence, leaving only the name, Nathan Silas. He didn't just want to hide his crime. Miles choked out, water dripping from his hair. He wanted to frame it. He gave us the clues, the theatrics, to make us believe we were chasing a psychotic phantom, while he was just an office worker trying to cover his tracks. So where is Sarah? Lena demanded, wiping the grime from her eyes. Miles looked at the diary, at the last frantic words. The door to her silence is locked by a name. He's not a serial killer, Miles said, his voice hard with cold fury. He's a man of routine and procedure. He would take her where he has absolute, unquestioned access. A place where a medical supervisor can hold someone without anyone listening. The hospital, Lena finished, her eyes narrowing in sudden, terrifying realization. He took her to the hospital. Miles and Lena emerged from a discreet maintenance hatch near the park's main street entrance, drenched, smelling of the sewer, and utterly determined. They commandeered a nearby patrol car, giving a curt explanation about a subterranean evidence retrieval to the bewildered officers as they sped towards St. Jude's Teaching Hospital, where Sarah Vance and Nathan Silas worked. Miles furiously typed out a warrant request for Dr. Silas's office and electronic records, citing the diary evidence and the extreme circumstances. He's a doctor, Miles. He knows institutional procedure, Lena reasoned, pulling the squad car into the deserted hospital parking garage. If he's holding her here, it won't be a public room. He needs somewhere with limited access and zero oversight. Miles nodded grimly. A place where he can easily monitor her, and where her sudden presence won't raise any flags. Think long-term storage, deep basement levels, or maybe an old, disused isolation wing. They bypassed the main entrance, using Miles's old precinct connections to access a seldom-used service elevator marked B5, Biohazard Containment/Records Archive. The elevator descended, plunging them into a heavy silence only broken by the whine of the old machinery. He's been playing us, Lena. The knives, the drone, the notes. It was all a brilliantly staged distraction to buy him time and make us chase a ghost, Miles said, the rage building in his voice. He needed us to focus on the horror story so we wouldn't look at the boring, procedural data of his real crime. The elevator doors opened onto B5. The air here was dry, cold, and heavy with the chemical smell of disinfectant and dust. The hallway was concrete, sparsely lit by caged fluorescent bulbs. It felt more like a prison than a hospital basement. The only sound was the low, mechanical hum of the HVAC system. Miles drew his weapon, motioning for Lena to stay close to the wall. They moved past rows of locked metal doors marked long-term records and decommissioned lab. Finally, they reached a steel door with a faded, bolted-over sign that once read, "Psychiatric hold, temporary isolation." The door was secured with a state-of-the-art electronic lock, far newer than the rest of the facility. "He installed that," Miles whispered, confirming his suspicion. "Private access, private security. This is it." Lena tried her best to override the lock with the precinct's master key card, but it failed. "Military-grade encryption, Miles. I can't hack it. He must be accessing it remotely." Miles looked at the thick metal door, then back at the dark hallway. They didn't have time to wait for the maintenance crew and the warrant. Sarah was still in the building, and Nathan Silas knew they were closing in. Suddenly, a quiet, muffled sound reached them from behind the locked door. A faint, desperate tapping sound, irregular and weak, but definitely there. Miles raised his foot, ready to kick the door in, but Lena grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with a professional's desperate insight. "Wait. The key." The final note said the door was locked by a name. Not a code, a name. Miles paused, recalling the note. The door to her silence is locked by a name. He looked at the electronic keypad. "Try Nathan." Lena quickly punched the 6 letters into the keypad. In ATHN, there was a soft, electronic chime, and the heavy bolt retracted with a loud thunk. Miles pushed the door open, his weapon raised, plunging them into the horrifying final stage of the killer's intricate game. The room beyond the steel door was small, padded, and completely soundproofed, a relic of the hospital's older psychiatric wing. The only light came from a single, heavily reinforced ceiling fixture, casting harsh shadows. In the center of the room, strapped into a high-backed examination chair, sat Sarah Vance. Her eyes were wide and terrified, but she was alive. Her mouth was taped shut with medical adhesive, and her wrists and ankles were secured with hospital restraints. The desperate tapping had stopped the moment the door opened. A wave of relief, quickly followed by cold, sharp anger, washed over Miles. He and Lena rushed to Sarah, weapons still raised, and scanning the room for Nathan Silas. The room was otherwise empty, except for a sleek, modern tablet mounted on a stand in the corner, its screen glowing with a live feed of the door they had just come through. "He's gone." "But he knew we were coming," Miles gritted out, rushing to release Sarah's restraints while Lena tore the tape from her mouth. Sarah coughed, her eyes darting frantically between the two detectives. He was just here. He was talking," she whispered, her voice raw. "Silas?" Miles asked, quickly releasing her wrist restraints. "Yes," he said. "He said he was done talking to me. He was waiting for you," Sarah cried, trying to regain control of her shaking body. "He said, I told them to listen to my story, and they followed every beat. We know about the identity theft, Sarah. We found your diary. We're going to get you out." As Lena helped Sarah out of the chair, Miles noticed something unnerving on the far wall. It was a corkboard covered with neat rows of index cards. They weren't patient files. They were press clippings and printouts of online articles. Miles stepped closer and recognized the headlines. Articles covering every murder, every kidnapping, every high-profile case Miles Kalin had ever investigated in the last 5 years. And stuck in the middle, written in Nathan Silas's neat, flowing script, was a terrifying hypothesis: the detective's patterns, predictable narrative arcs. "He wasn't staging a horror story for the public, Lena," Miles said, the full horror of the situation crystallizing. "He was staging it for me. He studied my profile, my methods, the way I look for narrative clues. He engineered this entire chase to ensure I was the one to find the diary and the name." Suddenly, the screen of the tablet in the corner flickered, interrupting the live feed of the corridor. A new image popped up, a map of the hospital's sub-basement levels, with a pulsing red dot centered on the boiler room. Below the map, a typewritten message appeared. I hope you enjoyed the show, Detective Kalen. The final clue to my real work awaits you in the heat. You can save the girl, or you can find my files. You cannot do both. Lena looked at the map, then at Miles, her face pale. He's not just a blackmailer. He's a calculated psychopath, Miles. This is his final test for you. Miles looked at Sarah, who was leaning heavily on Lena, still in shock. He knew his duty was to get her out and call in a tactical team. But the phrase "my real work" echoed in his mind. If Silas was using his hospital access to orchestrate something larger than identity theft, letting him disappear with the files was unthinkable. Lena, get Sarah out. Go to the main lobby, call the chief. Tell him Nathan Silas is armed and heading out. I need 5 minutes in that boiler room. Miles, no? It's a trap. He's baiting you. I know, Miles replied, his eyes cold and fixed on the red on the screen. But he wants me to chase the files. I'm going to give him what he wants. Get Sarah to safety. Miles turned and raced back out into the dimly lit, labyrinthine B5 corridor, his path now dictated not by a killer's riddles, but by his own professional obsession. He was chasing not only a suspect, but the dark truth the man had hidden behind a theatrical mask. Miles followed the map on his phone, navigating the deeper sub-basement levels of the hospital. The air grew thicker and hotter with every turn, vibrating with the massive, rhythmic thrumming of the building's central heating system. He was now chasing the sound of institutional power, not the mocking rhythm of a hummingbird. The corridor opened into the cavernous, oppressive heat of the main boiler room. Pipes wrapped in asbestos insulation crisscrossed the ceiling like metallic vines. The central boilers glowed a dull, menacing red. Miles moved slowly, his weapon held steady. The room was empty, yet the silence felt manufactured, heavy with expectation. Then he saw the tabled in a small, relatively cooler alcove behind a massive boiler. A folding metal table had been set up. On it were not files, but a single, heavy, industrial-grade laptop, open and running. Miles approached, the heat radiating off the machinery, making the air shimmer. He didn't touch the laptop, his eyes scanning for tripwires, hidden cameras, or an ambush. The laptop screen displayed a highly detailed, proprietary database interface, the hospital's main patient and procedural record system. And on the screen, a single, terrifying file was open, titled, Project Rebirth. Miles knew he had found Nathan Silas's real work. He risked a closer look at the screen. The project details were complex, filled with clinical jargon, but the core objective was horrifyingly clear. Nathan Silas wasn't just stealing identities. He was meticulously selecting patients, often those with minor psychological issues and no close family, and using the hospital's resources to fake their deaths, erase their records, and then reissue them with the stolen identities that IT wasn't blackmail. It was human trafficking, masked as clinical procedure, the ultimate form of identity theft. He was creating ghosts that could be sold to organized crime or foreign entities, all facilitated by the institutional silence of the hospital system. Suddenly, a metallic clank echoed from the far side of the boiler. Miles spun around, his weapon trained on the noise. Nathan Silas stepped out from behind a maintenance unit. He was meticulously dressed, not in scrubs, but in a tailored suit, his face calm, almost scholarly. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a remote control, the kind used for garage doors or gate openers. Detective Kalen. Punctual, as always, Silas said, his voice quiet and even, cutting through the boiler room noise. I knew you would choose the files over the girl. Your pattern is obligation. Your narrative is the truth at any cost. Sarah is safe, Silas. Miles shot back, his voice strained with heat and anger. It's over. Put the remote down. Silas gave a small, condescending smile. Ah, but is she? I told you, you could save the girl or find the files. You chose the files. And the final piece of the sequence, the ultimate horror, is the trapdoor. Silas pressed a button on the remote. A low, hydraulic hiss came from the far side of the room. Miles looked toward the sound and saw a thick steel door, previously unnoticed, slowly sliding down. sealing off the only exit from the boiler room. The air instantly became hotter, denser, and the roar of the machinery increased. The room is on lockdown, detective. No signal, no ventilation, and the primary fuel intake valve is about to open, Silas said, holding up the remote like a trophy. In exactly 3 minutes, the atmospheric pressure and heat will be excessive. He gestured toward the laptop. You have the files. You have the truth. But I win the final narrative. You will be found with the files, suggesting you died protecting my secret. The identity thief dies with his secrets, and the heroic, obsessed detective dies right beside him. A satisfying tragedy, wouldn't you agree? Miles raised his weapon, focusing on the remote in Silas's hand. It doesn't end that way, Nathan. It does, Miles, Silas corrected, his eyes glittering with manic triumph. Because I just told you my whole story, and you couldn't stop me from writing the last chapter. With a sudden, lightning-fast move, Silas hurled the remote control, not at Miles, but directly into the heart of the nearest glowing hot boiler. The remote shattered against the steel with a spray of sparks. The hydraulic hissing of the locking door stopped. It was fully closed. The roaring of the fuel intake began to crescendo. Miles was trapped, the truth of Silas's crimes mere feet away on the laptop, while the heat of the boiler room was becoming an immediate, lethal threat. The heat was instantaneous and unbearable. It felt like standing inside a blast furnace. The air was heavy with steam and the metallic scent of superheated machinery. Miles Kalin knew he had, at most, 60 seconds before the temperature became fatal. Nathan Silas, having thrown the remote into the boiler, didn't run. He stood his ground, a picture of calm malice, savoring the detective's imminent demise. Miles ignored the crushing heat and the burning sensation in his lungs. He focused entirely on the man, the mastermind who engineered the ultimate psychological trap. You miscalculated, Nathan, Miles gasped, his voice tight. You show me the narrative. I know your pattern now. Miles didn't fire his weapon. Instead, with a desperate burst of speed, he sprinted past Silas and toward the open laptop on the metal table. Silas laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Too late, detective. The door is locked. The files will burn with you. Miles reached the table and, without looking at the screen, he ripped the heavy laptop from its stand and used it as a shield, smashing the screen and chassis over the small, exposed emergency steam valve on the adjacent pipe. The impact burst the weakened valve. Instead of a controlled release, a massive, pressurized jet of scalding steam erupted, aimed directly at the now-sealed steel door. The intense, focused force of the steam was deafening. Miles dropped to the ground, shielding his head, the heat scalding the skin of his exposed hands and neck. Silas screamed, not in pain, but in sheer, hysterical fury at the destruction of his final, perfect scene. The files. You idiot. You destroyed the files. Miles rolled, ignoring the blinding pain, and looked at Silas, who was now stumbling toward the destroyed laptop, obsessed with the loss of his real work. You wanted to destroy the evidence, and me, Miles yelled over the roar of the steam. But you left one weakness. You are a man of procedure, Nathan. You wouldn't install a custom door without a manual override. Miles pointed his weapon, not at Silas, but at a thick, red metallic handle set into the wall near the now-shattered laptop table. It was the manual pressure release for the entire boiler system. You knew the door might fail, so you built a failsafe to vent the heat. That handle opens a pressure duct, Miles theorized, his mind working on pure adrenaline. But it's also a direct access point to the other side of the wall. Silas, realizing the detective hadn't chosen a violent confrontation, but an engineering solution, screamed and lunged toward the handle, trying to prevent Miles from reaching it. But Miles was closer. He ignored the struggling doctor and grabbed the heavy red handle, pulling it with all his remaining strength. The sound was a horrific, grinding screech. A thick, pressure-sealed metal panel beside the handle blew inward, not onto the corridor, but into a small, dark access crawl space, a maintenance passage between the main boiler room and the adjacent wing. Miles shoved the struggling Silas with his forearm, throwing the doctor into the path of the relentless steam, and dove headfirst into the opening, but he didn't look back. He just crawled, dragging himself through the narrow, scorching darkness, driven by the knowledge that Nathan Silas was now trapped in his own final, superheated narrative. The horror had cornered the monster. Miles burst out of a maintenance vent into a quiet, fluorescent-lit corridor, collapsing onto the cold tiled floor. He was scorched, soaking wet with sweat, and utterly depleted, but alive. Behind the vent, the horrific, deafening roar of the pressurized boiler room quickly faded into a muffled thud as the system finally collapsed, sealing Nathan Silas into his self-made tomb. Miles lay there for a moment, gathering his strength. He heard distant sirens. Lena had gotten Sarah out and called in the full emergency response that a moment later, Lena rounded the corner, her face etched with panic until she saw him. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "Miles. My God, I thought, what happened?" "Silas." Miles pushed himself up, leaning against the wall. "Silas is secured. Self-contained. His final act. The boiler room is an oven, Lena. He destroyed the evidence and locked himself in to ensure his death looked like an accident. And the files. The Project Rebirth." Miles shook his head grimly. He destroyed the laptop, but he didn't destroy the most important piece of evidence. The pattern. He reached into his smoke-stained jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled, water-damaged notebook. He thought he could use the horror story, the ritualistic knives, the riddles, the effigy, to make us chase a ghost, to buy him time, Miles said, his voice regaining its professional steel. He knew my pattern. I always follow the narrative. But he underestimated the one thing his psychopathic mind couldn't grasp, the human connection. Sarah's diary survived the flood. The name, Nathan, was the real clue, not the counting or the knife displays. Lena nodded, her gaze reflecting the horrifying genius of Silas's plan. He turned a boring procedural crime, identity theft, into a captivating serial killer narrative, ensuring the police would focus on the spectacle and not the simple paperwork. He needed us to believe he was an unstable phantom, so we wouldn't look at his stable, professional life as Dr. Silas, the man with full access to institutional silence. Miles finished. The precinct descended on the hospital. The boiler room was declared a disaster zone. Sarah Vance was safely in police custody, providing details that confirmed Silas's scheme, the creation of ghost identities for profit, a network far wider and darker than just the hospital. The investigation, now fully focused on institutional records and computer forensics, would expose the full extent of Project Rebirth. Hours later, as the dawn broke, Miles and Lena stood outside the hospital. Miles was wrapped in a blanket, paramedics checking his burns. "We got him, Miles," Lena said quietly. "It's over. The narrative is closed." Miles looked back at the imposing, sterile facade of St. Jude's, no longer seeing a place of healing, but a tomb of institutional horrors. He said the silence was a lie. Miles muttered, recalling the first typewritten note from the effigy. And he was right. The most terrifying things aren't the monsters in the dark. They're the men in suits, doing their work in the sterile, silent corners of society, trusting that no one will listen when the truth screams.